Hey guys, in this video we're going to be taking a look at Valeera the Hollow, which is the new Death Knight version for Rogue. It's a 9 mana, gain 5 armor, and the battle cry is give your hero stealth for 1 turn only. So this is the first time we've seen the stealth mechanic applied to an actual hero, rather than just a minion. So that means basically your opponent can't target you with minions and spells, but stuff like Mind Blast, Cthulhu, Greater Arcane Missiles, indirect spells can still hit you in the face, essentially. So for 9 mana, it's a fairly big tempo loss. So let's take a look at what the hero power does and how it affects the next coming turns. So the hero power is the first of its kind. It's a passive hero power, doesn't cost any mana, and it's called Death Shadows. During your turn, add a Shadow Reflection card to your hand. And a Shadow Reflection card, let's take a look. Each time you play a card, transform this into a copy of it. So let's take a look at the rules surrounding Shadow Reflections first. So what we can and can't do with this card. So looking at some footage, one of the first things I noticed about Death Shadows is it actually pulls the card from your hero power into your hand before you draw a card. So by the looks of the footage, if you have 9 cards in hand, it'll pull Death Shadows first, and then it'll attempt to draw a card. So it looks like you'll overdraw at 9 cards. So that's one thing to keep a note of when you're playing this deck, is to try keep your hand size now to 8. So rather than keeping your hand size to 9, you want to keep that hand size to about 8. So we can establish cards like Frost Giant and Arcane Giant will cost their reduced mana based on how many spells you played or how many times you pressed the hero power. So say your Arcane Giant costs 0 and you play it with Shadow Reflections, the Shadow Reflections version will also cost 0. So how does cost reduction and the likes of Emperor Forreston and Prep affect Shadow Reflections? Well, if you play Emperor Forreston and you reduce, per se, an Azure Drake to 4 mana, you then play that 4 mana Azure Drake next turn, the Shadow Reflections copy of the Azure Drake will still be 5 mana. It will retain its original cost, essentially. The same goes for Prep. So say you prep Eviscerate for 0 mana, the Shadow Reflections copy of Eviscerate will actually still cost 2 mana. So the type of reduction that you get from Emperor Forreston and Prep will not affect the mana cost of Shadow Reflections. Shadow Reflections will retain the original value. I did ask Blizzard how Shadowcaster is affected by this. So I asked Blizzard, if I were to Shadowcaster, then Shadow Reflections the Shadowcaster. So essentially I play Shadowcaster, then I play another Shadowcaster, I get a Shadowcaster back in hand for 1 mana. The next turn, if I play the Shadowcaster for 1 mana, is the Shadow Reflections version going to be 5 mana, or is it going to be 1 mana? If you follow me. They haven't answered me on that question yet, which is quite important because I'm planning on using this Shadow Reflections mechanic in the Infinite Shadowcaster Rogue that I've got. So it's kind of an interesting question if Shadowcaster affects the original cost of the card or not. Or if the Shadowcasted copy of the card is classified as an original card, just being at 1/1. So let's take a look. It's 9 mana, which is a very, very, very slow card for a rogue to play, and it essentially does nothing on that turn. Essentially, you're basically stealthing your hero and gaining 5 health. So the optimal time to play this card is either when your opponent has a very small board, so they have like maybe 1 minion and it's not a very powerful minion, or if you're behind and you have something like Vanish in hand, so you can clear the board next turn, would also be a good time to play it. It has to be timed correctly, and I guess you'll get a feel for it the more that you play this card, when's a good time to play it or not. The extra 5 health as well should save you from stuff like Yogg-Saron or maybe a Mind Blast, but it's very unlikely that you'll get hit by one of those cards because they're not really played in the meta at the minute. So let's take a look. If you are playing from behind, there are a few combinations you can do. You could do like a Prep, Vilespine, to basically take out 2 big minions on your next turn. In Wild, you can do something like, to try gain some health back, you can do Anti-Keelbot. If you want to draw more cards out of your deck, you could play something like Falnos, and then maybe spell down a minion, So the way this Shadow Reflections works, it's really kind of like a extra utility. Or if you've got your opponent low enough and you've got 2 Eviscerates in hand, essentially that means you've got like 3 Eviscerates in hand, because you could do Prep, Eviscerate, Eviscerate, and then the Shadow Reflection Eviscerate. So you can do 12 damage from hand with like some basic spells. The one application I'm going to be using this card for is to kind of streamline the current Shadowcaster Rogue that I've got in Wild. With this Shadow Reflections card, it means I only have to run 1 Shadowcaster, Bran, and that's it, essentially. I don't need Emperor Forison, I don't need Shadow Step, I don't need any of those cards, because the way I can set this combo up is play Valeera, the next turn maybe clear the board if I need to. If the board's fairly clear, I can do Shadowcaster, and then Shadow Reflections, the Shadowcaster back into hand, so I get a 1 mana copy of Shadowcaster. The next turn I play Bran, I Shadowcast the Bran with the 1 mana version, and then I use the 5 mana version of Shadowcaster to Shadowcast the Shadowcaster back into hand, and then I have 2 cards essentially, 2 Shadowcasters and 1 Bran. So it makes the deck a lot more streamlined, which means I can put even more card draw in, I can put in more heals, I can put in more removal. I can take out like 2 or 3 cards from the current deck list I've got, and then this card just adds value as well. So if I'm nearly dead, I could do something like, just like I mentioned before, Healabot. Cards like Burgle, if I want more value from hand, I can do a double Burgle. There's so many like interesting cards you can do. I could probably take something like Vanish with me now, because on a turn I play Valeera, the opponent's incentivized to fill their board up as much as possible, because you've just basically passed your turn. So you can have something like basically Vanish in the deck to help you recover from that initial tempo loss. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with this card. There's a few things that needs testing and needs clarifying. The stuff with Shadowcaster and the original mana costs and stuff like that need clarifying. But I'm really excited to actually try this one out. So obviously in Standard you've got combos like Arcane Giant. A few people have mentioned combinations with Jade Rogue, trying to get a lot of more. You can basically duplicate and get a lot more Jades out with this card. I think it's really interesting. I think it's interesting that Blizzard forced this card into your hand before you draw a card. So it's like having an extra card constantly in hand that you can't get rid of, and it might force you to overdraw a few times. So that's one thing that'll take getting used to. And yeah, I think it's one of the more interesting Death Knights. I think my favorite is this one at the moment. My favorite's this one and Shaman's Evolve Death Knight. It looks really interesting. It looks really fun. Keep an eye out for this one. I'll be definitely playing this a lot in Wild. I think this will be a staple in the deck that I play for fun, just because it'll make it a lot more reliable. At the minute to play Shadowcaster, you either need to play Bran, Shadowcaster, Shadowstep, Shadowcaster, or you need Forison to reduce the cost of all of them. Or you need to do Shadowcaster, Shadowcaster, Shadowstep, or Shadowcaster. With this Shadow Reflections, it's so much easier. Like it's ridiculously easy. And I guess in Standard you could do some Shadowcaster shenanigans fairly easy as well. Obviously without Bran, but there's a lot more fun things you can do. So yeah, I'll keep you posted on this one, because I think this is one of the cards I'm going to be playing the most, messing around in Wild and whatnot. The next card I'm going to cover off is the new Priest one, which got released today. So I'll be back. I'll be back with that video shortly. Enjoy, guys.